I have spent the last 17 years in my own prison for what she, Jeffrey, and all the co-conspirators did to me. I was raped repeatedly. I was raped 3 times a day sometimes. And I was not the only girl on that island. There was a constant stream of girls being raped over and over and over again. And yes, Ghislaine must die in prison because I've been in hell and back for the last 17 years.
And 27 for me.
I was 10 years old when Liz Stein was being trafficked. I was 10. That is how long the sex trafficking ring has been going on.
He killed himself. You want me to get, I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
All right, folks. So in the ongoing sort of, I would say, I wouldn't even call it a battle since most of these college campuses are just bending to the will of not only Donald Trump, but the pro-Israel powers that be that abound far and wide in this country. Breaking. Columbia University adopts controversial IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. Is that what it is? Is it association? I think that's what it is. Definition of definition of anti-Semitism. Initiates programming and training partnerships with the Anti-Defamation League, an organization that has repeatedly smeared pro-Palestine protesters. More details below. So this is an article in the Daily News. Columbia University adopts new definition of anti-Semitism, shuns pro-Palestinian group. Months into its fight to restore federal funding revoked by the Trump administration over anti-Semitism claims, Columbia University has adopted a new set of policies that include refusing to meet with a coalition of student protesters who pitched tents in support of Gaza. The embattled school also agreed to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that recognizes some criticism of Israel as discriminatory towards Jewish students. It basically renders all conceivable criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, including the most basic and the broadest, which is the declaration or professing of the belief that the state of Israel is, by its nature, a racist project. Like, how do you criticize Israel without making that core claim, right? The late Tuesday announcement comes days after Columbia was reportedly nearing an agreement with the federal government, though acting President Claire Shipman suggested any deal they may reach is, quote, only a starting point for change rather than bending to external demands. The fact that we face pressure from the government does not make the problems on our campuses any less real, Shipman wrote to students and faculty. Under the newly outlined plans, the university leader said Columbia has not recognized and will not negotiate with Columbia University Apartheid Divest, CUAD, its representatives, or allied student groups. It follows similar action taken by Barnard College, its sister school, in recent weeks. In spring 2024, CUAD took credit for the encampment that commandeered the main campus lawns as its representatives met with university administrators over their demands to take down the tents. When talks failed, the college administration called the NYPD to clear the demonstration twice. Those were those massive clashes with the cops that we all saw. Organizations that promote violence or encourage disruptions of our academic mission are not welcome on our campuses, and the university will not engage with them, Shipman wrote. The announcement also said that Columbia's revised understanding of anti-Semitism will be based on what's known, it's not association, it's alliance, that's what it is, as the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Colleges have increasingly used the framework to respond to campus protests, a development welcomed by many supporters of Israel, but criticized by protesters who say it infringes on free speech, of course. This definition states that some critiques of Israel as a Jewish state may cross a line into anti-Semitism. Well, yeah, obviously, not obviously it's anti-Semitic, but how do you criticize Israel without criticizing the basic premise that it is an apartheid racist state? If they're saying you can't say that, then what can you say about Israel?
Right.
Such as denying the Jewish people's right to self-determination or claiming that the existence of Israel is a racist endeavor. Comparing contemporary Israeli policy and that of Nazis would also be considered anti-Semitic under its terms. Plant a flag there. Hold that thought. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. Adopting the IHRA anti-Semitism definition had been one of the Trump administration's prerequisites for resuming negotiations over the flow of federal funding. But Colombia had previously stopped short of fully embracing the approach in its disciplinary cases. The formal incorporation of this definition will strengthen our response to and our community's understanding of modern anti-Semitism, Shipman said. That is just a completely anti-intellectual statement. This is an Ivy League university. They're now teaching you to be stupid. That's what they're teaching their kids now. Now you have to be a moron to remain in good standing at this esteemed Ivy League university. CUAD acknowledged Shipman's email and her disavowal of the group on X, but reserved its most searing criticism for the new anti-Semitism definition. So here is the CUAD handle, Columbia BDS. Columbia and Harvard adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is a bold step toward protecting students from having to hear critiques of genocide, apparently. Yes, well said. First it was Harvard, then Columbia. Soon the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism will be standard across higher education, not to fight hate, but to criminalize dissent. Absolutely. Columbia will also launch training by the Anti-Defamation League and several other national Jewish organizations and build out programs focused on constructive dialogue. Brian Cohen, executive director of the campus Hillel, welcomed the steps as recognizing a campus anti-Semitism problem and its impact on Jewish students' sense of safety and belonging, on their sense of safety and belonging. Mahmoud Khalil said in a recent interview, feelings are not facts, meaning there's a difference between feeling uncomfortable and being unsafe. How ironic that he had to frame it in Ben Shapiro's own language to make a point that these sort of anti-woke warriors have been making for years in every other context but this one. I hope this announcement marks the beginning of meaningful and sustained change, Cohen said. So back to Twitter. The Columbia University chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace releases a statement criticizing Columbia's announcements to adopt the IHRA definition and partner with the ADL. The JVP statement says, the new commitments to combat anti-Semitism are a dangerous escalation of Columbia's commitment to silencing opposition to genocide. The statement adds, our opposition to Israel's adoption of genocidal policies previously used against our own ancestors by Nazi Germany apparently constitutes anti-Semitism as well. Yes, once again, the comparison to the Nazis is considered anti-Semitic. Joseph Hawley, a Jewish professor at Columbia University, slams the university's announcements on partnering with the ADL and adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. The IHRA definition has become a right-wing fixation because they think it will let them suppress criticism of Israel even as the ethnic cleansing of Gaza intensifies and enters the phase of building actual camps. Yes, so here is the kicker, folks. Comparison to Nazis and Nazi Germany is considered anti-Semitic according to the IHRA anti-Semitism definition, which is now the standard at Columbia University. Under that definition, the IDF and the former Prime Minister of Israel would be considered anti-Semitic. So this is the Times of Israel just reporting this. One of the major Israeli papers with the headline, IDF said to warn against the Gaza humanitarian city. XPM brands it a concentration camp. So Israel is planning to build, and these plans have not gotten off the ground yet because there is political tension preventing that from happening, because even the Israelis, even the genocidal Zionist Israelis at the highest levels of the military are saying, wait a minute, this sounds like something the Nazis would do. They are making Nazi comparisons. A proposed plan to establish...
they just noticed, huh?
Yeah. A proposed plan to establish a humanitarian city, quote unquote, in southern Gaza, in which at least 600,000 Palestinians would be confined, continued to receive backlash from within Israel and abroad on Sunday, with some, including my highlighting here, because this is important, former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert alleging that it resembled the Nazi concentration camps built during World War II. So if the former Prime Minister of Israel were to come to Columbia University and give a speech about how this humanitarian city reminds him of concentration camps built by the Nazis, he would be run off campus as an anti-Semite. That's how absurd this is. That is how fucking absurd this is. That by their own definition, by their own rules, they would have to penalize the former Israeli prime minister for citing, apparently, one of the Israeli papers of records in which the IDF, the committers of these heinous crimes, are warning against this humanitarian city, making, yes, comparisons to the Nazis. That is how much Columbia University has jumped the shark. That is how far they have gone to debase themselves. For what? For Israel. All they got to do is divest from Israel, and these protests are not just broadly anti-Israel. I mean, they are, but they are done with a specific intention to get Columbia, their school, which they pay tuition to divest from Israel, because they don't want their dollars going to an institution that is then investing in Israel. And to think of just the denigration of this academic institution, a very well regarded and well respected academic institution, to basically force its students to play dumb on the question of Israel. So are they disbanding their colonial studies program? Like, are they just not going to teach about colonialism anymore? Are they going to still teach about colonialism?
Are they?
Right. Are they still going to teach any of that shit, or are they going to take that out? Because you talk about stupid, right? How are they going to keep that curriculum in place, but have this carve out for Israel where nothing they learn in one class can be applied to another because of who the people in question are?
Well, that was the article I wrote right after October 7th, that this was going to create a real problem for them, because the woke project in academia was never aimed at creating meaningful action. Its purpose was always to prevent meaningful threats to the establishment. That's why its fixations are almost exclusively backward looking. And insofar as it deals with the present, it deals with manners, microaggressions, right? If they're going to talk about slavery, they don't talk about the fact that you have more slaves alive today than in the entire history of the world. Because you start delving into that, you start delving into supply chains, you start delving into sweatshops, you start delving into how a lot of these corporations that donate money to these universities stay profitable, right? So they only want to talk about slavery of people who are long dead that you can't help, and interrogate it as theoretical.
Right.
Once this happened, well, now you've spent literally over a decade training a couple of generations of students now to believe that they're better than those people in the past who supported settler colonialism or were behind the Trail of Tears. We're better than that. And then they found out, no. This was all a con.
Right.
This was all a con. This was all a misdirection. It was all a fugazi. It was all about keeping you distracted with who touched whose hair and who pees in what bathroom. You were never meant to actually take any of these ideas into a place where it's going to fuck with the money, where it's gonna fuck with the war machine. As soon as they did, they found out what the real face of the establishment is. And that was the question from day one. How are they going to handle that? Is it going to radicalize them, or are they going to bend the knee? Now, if you look at what happened with Mamdani, and you look how overwhelmingly that vote was a youth vote, that is partly a reaction to this. And something that they should keep in mind, because this is wokeism on steroids. What happened to every draconian woke attempt to engineer human behavior? in every place where people had the opportunity to choose, whether with their vote or with their consumer choices, they voted against those projects. That's the same thing they're going to do here. You are not, in the end, going to be able to keep people inside these fences. Quite the opposite. You're just building a counter reaction against this that is going to, again, I mean, we've been saying this from the beginning, man. You know, the Zionists want an anti-Semitic backlash because it justifies their existence. But for
Right.
Jews who are perfectly happy and prospering outside of Israel, like most, it's going to be very bad when the dam breaks.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's go on to some Rumble rants here. Name My Taco says, breaking, Elmo signs with PragerU in attempt to launder image. Elmo just asking questions, said embattled puppet who was last seen hanging out with Ye. Good one. V Nettlesbound says $2 for Russell's Elmo. There you go. $1 Million Trooper says, so this is what Michael Rappaport was referencing with his AI of Grover in a keffiyeh. Got ratioed for not knowing Elmo is orange, not blue. No, I don't follow that idiot. Thanks, $1 Million Trooper. The Buddha's Nudist says, you boys better watch yourselves. You may have just beat on blackmail plots and controlling the media, but we goys are only 2 to 3 weeks away from having our own space lasers. Oh, boy. Goo81 says, why would any future student want to attend Columbia? That's what I've been saying. I mean, you're singing my song. Obviously, I don't know how anybody could even want to go there anymore. The university known for racism, censorship, and even physically assaulting their students after they paid their expensive tuition. Yeah, no, of course. That's been the page I've been on. Like,